The woman came off the freight with one boot missing and a carpetbag clutched so hard to her chest her knuckles looked white even through coal dust, and Marshal Elias Vance knew the bag before her feet hit the platform. He had seen its blue-stitched handle in his sleep for 27 years. He had once bought that bag in Cheyenne for a girl who laughed with her whole mouth and said a deputy's pay ought not be wasted on something pretty. He had buried another just like it when the Sweetwater took the stage and gave the town back 3 bodies, none of them hers. The woman stumbled on the wet boards. Elias caught her under the arm before the train could drag her down between the cars. She was not young. Somewhere past 40, maybe nearer 50, with ash in her hair, a split lip, and the sort of face life had pared down to the useful lines. She looked straight at him through the cinders and said, low and level, "If you're the marshal who kept waiting for Rose Halley, don't let them take me." Then she tried to stand on that bare-socked foot, failed, and nearly folded in half. Behind the last cattle car, 2 riders broke out of the dark with lanterns swinging from their saddles. Elias heard them before he saw them. The iron ring of bit against teeth, the hurry men where when they think the law ought to step aside for money. He shifted the woman behind him, one hand still on her elbow, the other resting near his holster without touching it. "This lady's under my hand now," he called. One of the riders, a narrow-shouldered man with a scarf over his jaw, checked up so hard his horse threw foam. "She stole from South Fork," he said. "Mr. Creel says she comes back tonight." "Mr. Creel can say it in daylight," Elias answered. The other rider leaned from the saddle to see around him, and there was a flash of greed in the man's face when he spotted the carpetbag. It was gone just as quick, but Elias had made a life out of reading signs too slight for other people to bother with. A bent blade of grass, a thumb worn shiny on a ledger edge, a man looking too hard at the thing he claims is worthless. The freight ground on eastward. Steam rolled over the platform and turned everybody ghost pale for a breath. When it cleared, the town still looked the same. Depot lamp shivering in the wind, water tower black against the sky, the false fronts of red wash huddled close as if it could keep out the planes, but the night had gone and tipped under his feet. And if you're listening from your own lit kitchen tonight, or a porch where the dark presses a little too close, say where that dark has found you. Towns like Red Wash always sound different depending on whose lamp is still burning when the train comes through. The woman swayed. Elias took the carpetbag from her because she was about to drop it, and he felt, beneath the old leather and grit, how carefully the weight had been arranged. Papers. Maybe a book. Not coin. Not clothes. The kind of burden a person drags across half a state only if it matters more than sleep or food or blood. He walked her toward his office with the riders following at enough distance to look obedient while still showing teeth. The office sat beside the jail, 2 rooms and a barred cell in back, with a cottonwood stump serving for a hitch rail and dust forever working itself under the door. Deputy Ben Avery came up from the boardwalk, chewing the inside of his cheek, his thumbnail tapping the butt of his pistol out of habit. "You all right, Marshal?" "No," Elias said, "but I know my name." Ben looked at the woman. "Who's she?" "She'll tell it when she's had water." The riders started in again, louder now that there were witnesses. Miss Lottie from the boarding house had her curtain cracked across the street. Old Dr. Kittredge was standing in his shirt sleeves on his porch with his vest unbuttoned and a lamp in one hand. Folks in Red Wash never admitted to eavesdropping, but they prized accuracy in what they repeated. "She robbed books and papers from South Fork," the scarfed rider said. "Belonged to Silas Creel." The woman made a sound that might have been a laugh if it had not come out so tired. "If they belonged to him honest," she said, "he'd have sent a warrant instead of hired hands." That earned a quick look from Ben. It earned a longer one from Elias. Inside the office, he set the bag on his desk and guided the woman into the straight-back chair by the stove. Her skirt hem was torn clear to mid-calf. Her left wrist showed old yellow bruises under fresh grime. When Ben reached for the water bucket, Elias jerked his chin toward the back door. "Go wake Doc proper. And tell those riders if they want to spend the night outdoors I can arrange it with less comfort than they expect." Ben hesitated, measuring the room, measuring Elias, measuring the carpetbag. Then he went. The woman drank like somebody who had been counting swallows all day. When she lowered the cup, she laid one hand flat on the desk, fingers spread, as if steadying not herself but the whole world. "My name's Ada Talbot," she said. "Widow. Bookkeeper when work can be found." I came out of South Fork with records Mr. Creel doesn't want seen, and with that bag besides. I found both in the top room of the old line shack house after Mrs. Devlin died. At the name Devlin, something old and cold slipped between Elias's ribs. Mercy Devlin had once worked as cook for the South Fork outfit. 27 years earlier, she had testified Rose Halley never reached the ranch from the flooded crossing. Mercy had been dead these 6 years. How do you know Rose Halley's name? He asked. Ada looked at the bag. Because it's written 3 times inside. Once on a letter. Once on a primer with a child's sums in the margin. Once on the little scrap of cloth wrapped around the key. He said nothing. Ada lifted her eyes back to his. And because every town between South Fork and here has some version of you in it. The marshal who meets trains, he doesn't need to meet. The one who never married. The one people stopped laughing at because even jokes get ashamed after enough years. It would have stung from another mouth. From hers it landed like weather. Not kind. Not cruel. Just true. Doc Kittredge came in smelling of camphor and sleep. He was a compact man with a tobacco-yellow mustache and the permanent expression of somebody offended by the frailty of the human body. He cleaned Ada's lip, bound her foot where a splinter and torn skin had done their work, and found no bones broken. While he worked, she told the plain part. Mercy Devlin had died a month before. South Fork's main house was being inventoried because Silas Creel meant to tear down the line shack and sell the land whole to a mining syndicate. In the attic wall, Ada had found a hidden shelf, the carpetbag, and 2 ledgers wrapped in oilcloth. She had not told a soul. She had copied enough figures to understand the fear in them, then taken the originals and run. Why not go to Cheyenne? Doc asked. Because the letters in that bag were addressed here, she said. And because a wrong buried this long ought to be returned to the man it was taken from. Outside, hoofbeats came and went. Word had reached the right ears. That happened fast where Silas Creel was concerned. Silas arrived before midnight, wearing a black coat too fine for the dust on the street and gloves the color of clean bone. He was past 60 and handsome in the expensive, preserved way some men get when other people have been doing the hard part of living for them. He removed his hat in the doorway as if entering church. Marshal, he said softly, you seem to be keeping company late. Ada went still in her chair. Elias saw it. So did Silas, and enjoyed it. You've got my employee, Silas said, and property stolen from my ranch. She says otherwise. Silas smiled a little. People say a great many things when they've been caught. Elias leaned one hip against the desk, close enough to the carpetbag to touch it if he chose. Then you can bring a complaint at 9. Silas's gaze drifted to the bag and stayed there one beat too long. That old thing is nothing. Household rubbish. My father never threw out a scrap in his life. Funny, Ada said, her voice frayed but steady. The riders looked near to trampling me for rubbish. Silas did not look at her. Mrs. Talbot is a woman of distressing imagination. Doc Kittredge snorted. Ben, back by the stove, pretended to study the latch on the rifle rack. Silas slipped his gloves back on finger by finger. This town has enjoyed a peaceful understanding for many years, Marshal. I'd hate to see old grief mistaken for present duty. There it was. Not a threat. Something cleaner and meaner. A man reminding another man exactly where to push if he wanted the bruise. Elias held his eyes. Bring paper or bring daylight. Tonight you get neither woman nor bag. For the first time, Silas's face changed. Only a little. A line set at the jaw. A flash of his father in him. Maybe, whatever hard old root that family had grown from. Then he tipped his hat to the room and left. When the street had gone quiet again, Doc said, that one came here too quick. He knew what she had. Ada's hands were shaking now that danger had gone polite. She hid it by reaching for the carpetbag, but Elias was quicker. He drew it toward himself, looked at her once for refusal, found none, and turned the brass clasp. The smell that came out was old paper, cedar, and the faint ghost of lavender long since beaten thin by time. On top lay a child's blue primer with the cover half peeled away. Under it sat 2 ledgers wrapped in oilcloth, a woman's comb missing 3 teeth, a narrow packet of letters tied with faded ribbon, and beneath all that, folded inside a square of muslin, a photograph so worn at the corners it had nearly become cloth. Rose, 21 years old, unsmiling because photographs always made her solemn. The room did not move for a long second. Even the stove seemed to hold its breath. Then Elias set his thumb on the top letter, saw his own name in Rose's hand, and knew with the calm terror of a man hearing a bridge crack under him that nothing in his life would ever go back to the shape it had been an hour before. He had slept in his office enough years that the room knew his breathing, but that night the boards complained at every turn and the stove ticks sounded like distant shots. Ada took the cot in the cell because she said bars on one side and a solid wall on three others were the safest room she'd seen in months. Elias sat at his desk till dawn with Rose's letters in front of him and read only the names on the envelopes, not the words inside. He was not afraid of finding her voice. He was afraid of finding it unchanged. At first light, red wash began to gather itself around the office. Ben fetched coffee. Miss Lottie sent biscuits under a towel and instructions that no one ever got better on stubbornness alone. The blacksmith paused outside long enough to spit and say if Creel's boys meant trouble, they'd find the forge open to men who disliked unfair odds. On the other side of the street, Mr. Pritchard at the bank unlocked his doors with his shoulders tucked high, a man already smelling weather. That was red wash for you. Half fear, half decency, each trying not to let the other show. Ada ate standing up, one hand on the cell bars, because sitting made her foot throb. In daylight she looked leaner than he had first thought. All the softness worked out of her except at the eyes. Their life had not hardened her so much as deepened her. She had the kind of face people confess things to if they were tired enough. Elias finally broke the ribbon on the top letter. Rose had written in pencil, the strokes pressed hard as if the wagon had been moving beneath her hand. If this reaches you before I do, it means the crossing turned mean or the road worse. Don't come tearing after shadows. Read the figures first. He stopped there. Ada watched him through the bars. You don't have to read it all now. I do, he said, though he didn't. He read the rest with his jaw set and his fingers so steady they frightened him. Rose had discovered false entries while helping a ranch widow reckon feed costs against a mortgage note. The widow had been paying. The ledger said she had not. Rose traced the same hand through 6 other accounts, all tied to parcels bordering the creek and the South Road. Land women had lost after husbands died. Land that later turned up under shell purchases and, eventually, South Fork control. She named Gideon Creel, Silas's father. She named Mercy Devlin as witness to the books being hidden. She wrote she was bringing copies and feared being followed. There was no farewell in that first letter, only purpose. Rose had always believed a truth ought to arrive with its boots on. Ada came out when he opened the cell. She leaned on the door frame, not asking permission from habit anymore. There's more in the ledgers than land theft, she said. I copied some before I ran. Mr. Creel's been calling in notes on men who are current and charging storage on cattle he never housed. A bank can starve folks as tidy as winter. You worked for him long? 6 years. Off and on before that. Why stay? She looked at the biscuit in her hand as if the answer might be hidden in the flour. Because when my husband died, he left me 2 things. Debt and his name. The debt went faster. There was no self-pity in it. That seemed to move him more than if there had been. By noon, Silas had sent a county clerk with a typed complaint for theft and unlawful possession of business records. Not a warrant yet, but a first brick laid where a wall meant to stand. Elias kept the paper. Kept Ada too. He told Ben to ride south and see whether the telegraph line to Casper was still working. Ben came back an hour later with wire hanging like dead vine where somebody had cut it clean beyond Miller's Bend. That was one kind of answer. The easier path stood plain enough. Return the ledgers. Call this an old hurt with no body and no certainty. Let red wash keep its peace. Let the bank keep its confidence. Let Silas Creel go on being the sort of man people called necessary when what they meant was dangerous to cross. The harder path looked like ash before the fire even started. A public fight with the richest man within 50 miles. Men's notes called in. Women pressed to choose between groceries and principle. Ada hauled to county on charges that would be made uglier before they were made true. His own badge perhaps taken, if the right officials were leaned on. He went outside because rooms can crowd a man when he's trying not to hear himself think. The wind had come up out of the west, dry and full of alkali. Across the street Mr. Pritchard was speaking low to 2 ranchers, both of whom kept glancing toward the jail office. Farther up the boardwalk, a little boy rolled a hoop past as if towns were not forever one decision away from changing shape. Ada joined him after a minute, careful on the wrapped foot. You know the choice, she said. So do you. You could still leave. And go where? She gave a tired shrug. Men like Silas keep finding the next county if you let them. He looked at her properly then. Why bring it to me? You said the letters were addressed here. That's not the same thing. No, she said. It isn't. She rested both hands on the hitch rail, eyes on the dust moving in strips along the road. I read one. Not all. Enough to know she trusted you, because you were the sort of man who would rather lose comfort than lose the straight line of yourself. I've spent too much of my life around folks who can't say the same. That struck closer than praise would have. Elias kept his face turned toward the street. She added, quieter, grief is a house, Marshal. Stay in it long enough, and you start calling the locked door loyalty. He let the wind answer first. Somewhere a screen door banged. Someone laughed outside the mercantile, and the sound seemed to come from another country. I met every train for 5 years because I thought she might be hurt, he said. Then 10 because no body was found. Then longer because people had got used to it, and I suppose I had too. At some point, waiting stops feeling like hope and starts feeling like the only thing left that still belongs to you. Ada nodded as if he had just balanced a figure out loud, and she had seen where it landed. Doc Kittredge came up the walk rolling a cigar he never lit between thumb and finger. Creel just called in the Estes note, he said. That widow by the south ditch. She's paid near all of it. Pritchard says orders are orders. Because of this? Ada asked. Because of pressure, Doc said. You can name the source yourself. That was how the world closed in around Silas Creel. Not with guns first. With accounts. With water. With the knowledge that hunger makes honest men apologize for things they never did. Elias went back inside and opened the second ledger. The handwriting shifted halfway through from Gideon Creel's angular script to Ada's clean, spare columns. She had been careful. Dates aligned. Margins exact. Corrections noted rather than hidden. Besides several old mortgage entries, she had penciled tiny crosses. When he asked, she told him the crosses marked numbers altered after filing. How do you know? I copied the county tax book for Mr. Holland last winter when his eyes gave out. The filed totals differed by cents in some places, dollars in others. Too many to be mistake. You kept that to yourself? I kept breathing, she said. By late afternoon, Ben returned from a second ride with worse news. 3 riders from South Fork were at the livery asking questions about spare horses, and a deputy from county was expected by morning. That evening Red Wash kept its distance without fully turning away. Supper plates arrived from back doors. Nobody lingered. Nobody wanted to be seen choosing sides before sides were named. Miss Lottie herself brought coffee after dark and stood in the doorway with her spectacles misted from the cup. You tell me if the lady needs a room when this turns into the sort of scandal I can charge extra for, she said. Ada almost smiled. When Lottie had gone, Elias took the ledgers, Rose's letters, and Ada's copied pages and spread them across the desk. The lamplight put gold on the paper edges and deepened the grooves in the wood where years of law had scratched themselves in. He found the trail the way he had always found trails, not by staring at the obvious print, but by noticing what around it had been forced to bend. Payments made in cash only where checks were usual. A survey fee entered twice. A widow's note transferred the week before her remarriage, though church records in the primer showed she had married 2 months later. Rose had been using the child's arithmetic book to copy names and amounts. Clever girl. Plain enough to escape notice. Precious enough now to make a man's throat hurt. Ada stood beside him, one finger hovering just above the lines, never touching ink she had not been invited to touch. Their sleeves brushed once. Neither moved away. If we prove the old fraud, she said, the new notes wobble with it. Silas leveraged half his present holdings on land his father never lawfully owned. Prove to whom? She gave him a look that held no patience for despair. To anybody still able to count. There, at the edge of lamplight and danger, with the town listening through its walls and Silas gathering force beyond them, Elias felt the last quiet space collapse. If he stepped back now, it would not save peace. It would merely teach the wrong men what peace cost. He lifted his head toward Ben. Saddle my bay after midnight. We're riding out to the line shack. Ben blinked. Tonight. Before Creel's men decide to search it after all. And before Rose's trail, bent but not broken, went cold again. The moon was thin enough to be useless. They left town in 2 directions to fool any watcher with half a brain and joined up a mile west where the road split around a dry arroyo. Ben rode point as far as Miller's Bend, then turned back under orders he disliked. Ada rode behind Elias on the Marshal's Bay, one hand locked in the back of his coat, the other clamped around the carpetbag under his arm. Her cheek touched his shoulder only when the horse dropped sudden through bad ground. Each time she straightened at once, embarrassed by need. Each time he said nothing. The line shack sat at the far north edge of South Fork land, where the prairie buckled into low draws and scrub pine clung where it could. The ranch used it years ago for remuda hands during calving season. Lately it had held mostly mice and old weather. Mercy Devlin had lived there alone after her knees failed, keeping chickens until the coyotes educated them. Elias dismounted first. The yard gate hung by one hinge. A rusted washtub lay on its side by the porch steps. In the shed, somebody had been through recently. Footprints. 2 men, boots well heeled, no attempt to hide sign. They had searched in daylight and left in a hurry, maybe thinking Ada had taken everything that mattered. Inside the shack, stale ashes and old soap still lingered under dust. Mercy's Bible lay on a shelf beside a chipped cup. Ada went straight to the back room and pressed the wallboard where she had found the hidden space. Empty now? She looked at him as if to say she had not exaggerated. He believed her. He had believed her from the moment Silas's riders went for the bag before the woman. They worked by lantern, fast and quiet. Elias lifted floorboards under the bed. Ada checked the cookstove cavity and the rafters. In the main room, he found a nail hole freshly gouged wider, then another. Somebody had once hung a picture there. When he removed the frame still leaning in the corner, a cheap print of a shepherd and lamb. The plaster behind it gave up a folded paper gone stiff with heat and time. Not a letter, a receipt. Feed, lamp oil, quinine, signed 27 years ago by Mercy Devlin, with a line beneath in another hand. For the schoolmarm, 3 days only. Lord, forgive what fear kept me from carrying farther. Rose had reached the shack alive. The knowledge hit him hard enough he had to sit. Ada knelt beside him without touching. He stared at the scrap until the words blurred, then sharpened again. 3 days only. She had been that near to him. That near the town. That near the life he had gone on not living because the ending had never been given to him straight. Hoofbeats cut across the yard. Fast. Too many. Ada blew out the lantern before he had fully risen. The room dropped into blue-black dark. Elias drew his pistol. Men slid from saddles outside with leather whispering and spur chains chiming small and cold. Back room, he breathed. They moved with the carpetbag between them. The first fist hit the front door as they crossed the threshold. The second split the latch. Wood groaned. No time for speeches. No time for thought longer than muscle. Elias shoved Ada toward the small back window. Out and left. To the wash. What about you? Move. The front door cracked inward. A voice called, Mr. Creel wants the woman alive. Elias fired through the dark toward the voice and heard a curse. Then the low, violent confusion of men losing confidence. Ada kicked the back sash loose. Night air rushed in. He got her through first, bag after her, then followed as shot tore splinters from the bedpost where his head had been. Outside, the ground fell away sharper than memory had kept it. Sage tore at his trouser leg. Ada slipped, and he caught her by the waist, set her right, kept going. Behind them, someone came through the window wrong and screamed when he landed ankle-deep in the chicken pit stones. They hit the wash and dropped into it just as lantern light combed the yard. The wash ran dry 9 months of the year and treacherous the other 3. Tonight it held only shadow and loose gravel. Elias knew the shape of country under darkness the way some men knew the Psalms. He moved by feel and slope, one hand on Ada's sleeve, pistol in the other. Above, riders spread to either side. You can't keep me breathing if you bleed out yourself, Ada whispered. He had not noticed the burn in his upper arm until she said it. Nothing deep. A crease. Warm and wet under the coat. They reached a shelf of stone where the wash narrowed. Elias stopped, listening. Hooves on the bank ahead now. Cut off. He put his mouth near Ada's ear. There's a culvert under the old South Road 50 yards on. If they press us, you crawl it and don't look back. I'm not leaving you. That wasn't a discussion. In the pause that followed, he heard a rider above them say, Check the bag if you find it. Mr. Creel said there's paper sewn somewhere in the lining. Ada turned fast enough he felt it rather than saw it. Sewn? He mouthed. She nodded once, fierce and startled. I never knew. There was the one quiet revelation the night had been working toward, not a rescue, only a deeper edge to the blade. Rose had hidden something even Mercy never found, something Silas knew of or guessed. The riders began down into the wash. Elias fired once high against the bank on the far side. The ricochet made the horses shy. Men cursed. In the same breath, he dragged Ada toward the culvert, dropped to his knees beside it, and hauled the carpetbag into what little moon there was. The stitching along the inner seam looked ordinary until you saw one thread brighter than the rest, faded sky blue under grime. Rose had used blue thread on everything she meant to trust. His fingers were clumsy with blood and haste. Ada thrust her small mending knife into his hand. He slit the seam and pulled free a narrow oilskin roll no thicker than a man's wrist. "Go," he said again. But the riders had corrected faster than he hoped. Lantern light spilled over the bank. A man jumped down almost on top of them. Elias drove a shoulder into his knees, and the three of them hit gravel in a knot of dust, elbows, and oaths. Ada swung the carpetbag like a brick and caught the man across the face with the brass clasp. He went limp enough for Elias to strip the shotgun from him. Then there was no hiding left in the night, only breaking through it. They ran the wash south, shotgun once, pistol twice, stones sliding underfoot. A horse screamed. Someone yelled for them to stop as if obedience were still a thing to expect. At the culvert mouth, Elias fired the lantern out and darkness dropped hard again, blessed and total. They got clear because he knew the land and because Ada did not waste breath on panic. By the time they crawled up the far bank and made the scrub line, the riders were searching the wrong turn in the wash. Elias could taste blood now, his own, copper and dust together. Ada seized his sleeve and dragged him into the shelter of a fallen pine. "Sit," she said. "I've had better invitations. Take this one anyway." She tore a strip from her petticoat and wrapped his arm tight enough to make him hiss. Her hands were steady. Above them the riders fanned and regrouped. One voice carried plain in the wind. "Mr. Creel says the marshal's badge won't save him by morning." Elias sat with his back to the pine and the oilskin roll in his lap, feeling for the first time not old but tired in a way that reached bone. Ada crouched in front of him, hair escaped from its pins, face streaked with dirt, and something darker across the cheek. She had struck a man for him and not thought twice. She had ridden half the night to return a dead woman's truth to a stranger. Somewhere along the road between Redwash and this tree, impossible had begun the long work of becoming inevitable. He untied the oilskin. Inside lay Rose's final affidavit, signed shaky but clear, witnessed by Mercy Devlin and a traveling surveyor named Caleb Snow. There was also a second letter, sealed, with his name on it, and a smear where one raindrop or one fevered thumb had blurred the pencil. From the ridge behind them came another set of hoofbeats, slower now, deliberate, like a net drawing closed. If they could get the affidavit to town, Silas Creel could still be broken. If they could not, morning would find Ada charged, Elias stripped, and Rose buried a second time. He looked toward the dark east where Redwash lay beyond miles of sage and dead, and sleeping people who did not yet know what kind of dawn was riding for them. And he understood that the question was no longer whether the truth would hurt. It was whether they could keep it alive long enough to make the hurt count. They did not try for town before dawn. Elias knew better than to cross open country with half South Fork ranging for them, and blood in his sleeve marking the brush. Instead, he led Ada north by a cattle path into a shallow basin roofed with rock and juniper where line riders sometimes holed up in bad weather. There was an old fire ring there, a dry blanket of needles, and enough cover to make a pause less foolish than motion. He built no fire. Ada objected only with a look, then folded herself down on the stone opposite him and set about practical things. She cleaned his wound with water from the canteen and a corner of her apron. He read Rose's sealed letter while she worked, because to do otherwise would have been another kind of cowardice. "Elias, if Mercy is right and I have not long, then let me be plain for once where I should have been plainer sooner. I loved you enough to trust what was best in you even when it cost me what I wanted. Do not spend your good years making a chapel out of my name. Finish this if it can be finished. If it cannot, then at least live wide enough that what was done to me does not get to be the biggest thing in your life." There was more. Memory. A joke about his coffee. An apology for never learning to ride side saddle properly, no matter what polite women said. He stopped there, because the rest was not for grief. It was for a man asked to go on. Ada tied off the bandage and sat back on her heels. Bad. He folded the letter slow. No. Worse. Kind. That made her mouth soften. He handed her the affidavit. She read by moon-thinned light, lips moving slightly over the witness names. Caleb Snow, she said. That surveyor worked for the Territorial Land Office before statehood. If his books still exist, this joins to them. Can you prove the newer entries? Yes. She looked up. If Red Wash lets me speak before I'm dragged to county. A coyote called far off. Another answered. The country went on pretending men did not matter much, which was one of the few useful lies the Plains ever told. After a while, Ada said, My husband liked cards more than wages. When the cards turned against him, he'd pledge what wasn't his. My ring once. A mule another time. The last winter before he died, he took a widow's egg money for a promise to alter her note at the mercantile. He couldn't alter anything. I repaid it after burial with 6 months' books and my mother's silver spoons. But there are things a woman doesn't scrub off just because the debt goes down to zero. He listened because she had earned a listener. I kept working for men like Creel because figures are one of the few places I can still make a clean line, she went on. Only this time the line led somewhere ugly enough I got tired of telling myself survival was virtue. She wrapped her arms around her knees then, not from cold, but because a person can speak only so naked before the body asks for some kind of cover. Elias took Rose's letter from his pocket and laid it between them. She told me not to make a chapel out of her name. Ada gave a short breath that almost smiled and almost broke. A sensible woman. She always was. Then do her the courtesy of listening. He looked past her to the eastern rim where night was paling. You speak as if it were simple. No, she shook her head. Not simple. Just necessary. Her hand rested near the old carpetbag, fingers on the blue thread where the seam had been cut. The heart doesn't heal clean. It mends like a work shirt, stronger where it was torn if somebody cared enough to stitch it. He closed his eyes a moment, because there are truths a man can bear better in darkness. When he opened them, he drew the muslin bundle from the bag. Inside, beneath Rose's comb and photograph, he had found in the night a small coin purse with $18 in gold and paper. Not much by a rich man's standards. A life by poorer ones. Ada had not seen him separate it from the rest. He set the purse on the stone between them. She hid this too, he said. Could help you leave when this is done. Ada did not reach for it. It's yours more than mine. Not mine at all. He pushed it back toward the bag. Mercy kept it. Rose meant it for witness fees or travel, likely. There are widows in Red Wash whose notes got called yesterday for no sin except standing near this truth. It belongs to the first one who needs a roof. Ada noticed what he did not do then. He did not claim the money because the dead woman had loved him. He did not claim the story because he had suffered longest. He took only the letter and the affidavit and let the rest remain what it had always been, part of a wrong larger than his own heart. She said nothing. She only looked at him for a long beat, as if some account inside her had just balanced. Dawn came cold and colorless. They made the last miles to town hidden in wagon ruts and creek beds, arriving by the cottonwoods north of Red Wash just as the church bell struck 8. Smoke lifted from chimneys. 2 wagons stood outside the bank. Silas had wasted no time. Word carried quick that the Estes note, the Miller grazing lien, and Miss Lottie's boarding house mortgage were all due for immediate review. Men who feared scandal had begun to call it prudence. Elias and Ada entered town through the alley behind the feed store. Ben Avery found them there, pale with relief and fury both. They've got county deputy inside your office, he said. Paper to suspend you pending investigation. Creel's sitting at the bank with Pritchard and half the note holders in town. Says he'll settle matters civil if Mrs. Talbot returns the books and signs confession. Ada made a tired sound through her nose. Civil. Ben saw the bandage on Elias's arm and swore under it. What's the play? Elias looked at the courthouse square, the bank door, the people trying not to gather while absolutely gathering. We stopped pretending this is private. That was the turn Red Wash needed. Not courage all at once. Permission. By 9:30 the room over the mercantile was full, because it was the largest indoor space in town, and because folks preferred witnessing a fight to guessing at it later. Silas sat near the front beside Mr. Pritchard, gloves folded in his lap, face composed into injured patience. County Deputy Marston stood by the wall, chin oiled and important. Miss Lottie came in with flowers still on her sleeves and planted herself where everyone could see her. Widow Estes took the seat beside her with both hands locked around a hat she had long since stopped wearing. Dr. Kittredge stood near the stove like a man prepared to pronounce on whichever body fell first. Elias entered without his badge on. That caught the room. He set it on the table in front where all could see the star and judge for themselves whether a piece of metal had ever been the larger part of him. Silas rose halfway. Marshal, former Marshal, perhaps we can spare the theater. Return what is mine, and I will recommend leniency. No need, Elias said. I didn't come for leniency. Ada stepped up beside him with the ledgers hugged to her ribs. Murmurs crossed the room. A woman standing shoulder to shoulder with the law was one thing. A woman carrying the books that might bankrupt the finest code in town was another. Silas's gaze moved to her and chilled. Mrs. Talbot, you were given shelter and wages when you had neither. Remember that before you choose badly in public. Ada answered in the calm tone bookkeepers use when correcting a column. A wolf that doesn't eat the whole flock in one winter still isn't a shepherd. A few heads turned at that. Elias nearly smiled. He began with the old wrong because old wrongs make the roots of present ones visible. He read Rose Halley's first letter aloud. Not the private letter, not the words meant for love, only the figures and names and the warning that Gideon Creel had altered mortgage books to seize land from widows. Silas let him finish, then lifted one shoulder. A dead woman's pencil is not evidence, nor is a hysterical ranch servant's theft. Ada laid the first ledger open, then let the numbers speak with her. For the next hour, she did what she had been built by pain and practice to do. She walked the room through dates, totals, and transfers in that plain, unornamented voice of hers, and because she never reached for drama, drama came on its own. Widow Estes recognized her husband's mark on a receipt that did not match the amount in the bank copy. Mr. Holland, called from the back row, admitted the tax book figures she had penciled from memory aligned with what his failing eyes had once tallied. Doc Kittredge produced the doctoring note he kept for everything and swore under oath that Widow Miller's late husband had been bettered in the day a supposed payment default was signed in his name across county. Ben Avery handed up the cut telegraph wire and named the place it had been severed. The trail widened beneath everybody's feet. And before this next piece lands, let me ask you something worth carrying a minute. If the truth would cost your town its comfort, your job its safety, your own good name its cover, would you still set it on the table where everyone had to look? Or would you call silence wisdom and go home with it? Folks tell on themselves by how they answer that, even alone. Silas kept his smoothness until Elias laid down Caleb Snow's survey affidavit beside Rose's. Then the older man's right thumb moved against his glove seam, once, twice. A sign so small most would miss it. Elias did not. This document, Silas said, if genuine, concerns my father. A dead man cannot answer. No, Elias said. But living ones can. He turned to Mr. Pritchard. Did South Fork collateralize its recent notes against parcels 12 through 19 on the South Creek? Pritchard swallowed. That is bank business. Meaning yes. Elias shifted to the room. And if Gideon Creel never lawfully held those parcels, Silas pledged property he could not own clean. Pritchard's face went gray enough to settle the matter before his mouth did. That was when Deputy Marston moved, at last remembering he had been sent to do more than lean. He stepped toward Ada with the warrant for theft in his hand. Mrs. Talbot, you'll come with me pending county review. Silas almost recovered then. The old machinery of fear began to hum. A woman charged. A room uncertain. A rich man nearly home. Elias reached into his coat and drew out Rose's final affidavit. Not the letter. Never that. Only the paper meant for courts and counts and public use. Ada saw what he withheld and lowered her eyes for one brief second, understanding the gift in it. He handed the affidavit to Marston instead of reading it himself. You serve county law, he said. Read the witness line. Marston frowned, read, and blinked. Caleb Snow's signature meant State Land Office. Mercy Devlin's cross meant a named witness. Attached to the back, sewn in the oilskin Rose had hidden, was a notation of filed survey copies in Cheyenne and Casper. Records that could be fetched if the telegraph were ever allowed to do its work. Silas stood. This is absurd. No, said a voice from the back, thin but steady. Widow Miller had risen with both hands on her cane. Absurd is paying a note twice, and being told gratitude is due. Another voice joined. Then another. Men less brave than hungry. Women less loud than done. The room changed the way weather changes on open ground. Not in thunder. In pressure. Folks who had been waiting to see which way safety leaned understood, all at once, that safety was no longer attached to Silas Creel alone. Pritchard removed his spectacles and polished them on a handkerchief to buy time he did not have. Pending verification, he said, the bank will suspend all calls related to the disputed parcels. Silas turned on him, and that was his first true mistake. You weak little clerk. Everybody heard it, including the clerk. The second mistake came faster. Silas reached for the ledger on the table as if a grab in public could still pass for authority. Ada caught the book first. He seized her wrist. Elias moved one step, no more, and said, very quietly, take your hand off her. The room held. Silas looked at the faces around him and realized power had gone thinner than he had meant it to. He let go, but not before everyone saw he had to think about it. Marston cleared his throat. Mr. Creel, until county and state review these filings, I advise you not leave town. Advise. Not arrest. Not yet. But the air had changed. Men like Silas survive on certainty. Once people watch them reconsider a door before walking through it, the work is half done. What finished him was smaller. Miss Lottie marched to the front, dug in her reticule, and slapped a receipt onto the table. You tell that bank to compare my mortgage interest to this, and if it's honest, I'll eat Mr. Pritchard's hat. Laughter cracked the room. Not kind laughter. Relieved laughter. Dangerous to the wrong man because it proved folks were no longer frightened of being seen against him. Then Widow Estes laid down Rose's hidden gold purse. That's payment toward my note if we're still pretending we owe thieves manners, she said. Elias recognized the purse and did not touch it. Ada did not either. The room saw that too. By afternoon, the telegraph line was restrung under half the town's supervision. Messages went east and south, to Casper for land filings, to Cheyenne for survey copies, to a district attorney whose name Silas had once spoken like a friend's and would now have to hear spoken like weather. By sundown, South Fork hands were riding in quiet groups toward other employment. Power can vanish slower than dignity and still feel fast when a man has built his house on both. The confirmations began arriving the next day and the next. Caleb Snow's field notes matched Rose's figures. County copies differed from bank copies in every place Ada said they would. 3 note calls were rescinded, then 9. Pritchard, discovering late that a backbone can be borrowed from a room if not owned outright, suspended Silas from bank business pending inquiry. The mining syndicate withdrew. By weeks, a state investigator arrived with a valise, a neat beard, and the indifferent politeness of a man who ruins careers for a living. Silas Creel was not dragged through the street. Red Wash was too tired for spectacle and perhaps too decent. He was required to surrender his books, his office, and the smooth belief that all losses belonged to other people. When he left the bank for the last time, folks on the boardwalk made space without bowing. That was enough. A man can survive hatred. It is irrelevance that eats him. Rose Halley's name went onto the church roll properly at last, not as missing, not as presumed, but as witness. Mercy Devlin's too. Elias saw to that himself. He was offered his badge back 3 days after the hearing. He took a night to answer and another morning to pin it on. Not because the star had regained weight, but because he had learned it was lighter than truth and ought to stay that way. Ada moved into a room at Miss Lottie's boarding house until her foot mended. Then she stayed because leaving began to look less like prudence and more like old habit. She took over the bank's damaged books on temporary pay, under 3 separate eyes and a town's worth of suspicion, which suited her fine. Trust, she said, ought to be earned with columns, not speeches. If what just passed through you felt familiar, if some old grief in you stood up straighter, hearing a lie finally meet daylight, then stay a little longer with me. Press the like button if you want more stories that sit beside the hard parts without looking away, and subscribe if you've learned, same as Red Wash did, that quiet people are sometimes the ones carrying the whole truth home. The first evening Elias came to the boarding house porch without business in his hat. Miss Lottie saw him through the front window and made herself urgently necessary in the kitchen. Ada was shelling peas into a crock by the door. The sunset had gone copper along the grain elevator, and children were being called home one name at a time up and down the street. I brought this back, he said, holding out Rose's photograph. Ada looked at it, and then at him. I thought you'd keep it. I will. The copy. He held up another card, freshly made by the photographer from the original. That one belongs in the church book with the affidavit. She spent too many years hidden in other people's fear. Ada set the peas aside. That sounds like something she'd have wanted. She also would have wanted me to stop meeting trains I've no cause to meet. Will you? He thought about the depot platform at night, the steam, the old foolish ache dressed up as duty. Then he looked at the woman on the porch steps with pea silk on her fingers and ledger ink still smudged near her thumb. Not all at once, he admitted. Her smile came slow, as if she was used to letting it. No reason a man has to heal rude. They sat there until the street lamps were lit. He told her about Rose learning sums faster than the boys she tutored and pretending not to enjoy outshooting them with slingshot stones. Ada told him about her mother, who could sew a shirt so straight men argued over whose shoulders deserved it. When silence came, it did not feel empty. It felt furnished. A week later, Silas stopped Elias outside the post office. No gloves now. No hat brim polished bright. He had shrunk somehow, without losing an inch. You might have ruined me, Silas said. Elias considered that. No. Your father taught you the figures. You finished the arithmetic. Silas absorbed the blow because there was nothing to swing at in it. And the woman? Ada Talbot is not a subject for your curiosity. Silas's mouth tightened. You'll marry a ghost before you marry her. Maybe the old Elias would have answered with anger. Maybe the lonely one would have answered with shame. This one only looked at him until the other man had to drop his eyes first. That same afternoon, the state investigator found enough in the South Fork transfers to begin formal proceedings. Silas was not led away in irons that day, though such days still waited down the road. What mattered to Red Wash was simpler. Men stopped lowering their voices when he passed. Women stopped hurrying their daughters indoors. A tyrant doesn't need prison to start losing. He only needs witnesses who have quit pretending not to see. Autumn came dry and kind. Widow Estes kept her place. Miller's cattle watered where they always had. Miss Lottie raised rates on traveling salesmen and called it community recovery. Ada's books straightened the bank enough that Pritchard took to doffing his hat to her twice, once for respect and once for caution. One Saturday near dusk, Elias found her at the back table in the bank, sleeves rolled, recopying damaged pages with her head bent and her lips moving softly over totals. He stood there longer than necessary, just watching the lamp work gold into her hair. You're breathing like a man about to serve papers, she said without looking up. I was thinking. Dangerous. I've heard so. He came to the table and laid down 2 railroad tickets. Cheyenne. Next month. State hearing on the Creel filings. They asked for my statement and yours. She looked from the tickets to his face. And there's a hotel there with tolerable coffee. After, if you wished, we might take the long road back and waste an afternoon on purpose. For the first time since he had known her, Ada Talbot looked honestly startled. Not frightened, not guarded, just reached. You ask as if I'm doing you a favor. Are you not? She leaned back in the chair. The room smelled of ink, paper, and the first cold sneaking under the door. Elias, I am not young. I am not easy. Some days I still wake counting what can be taken. So do I. I have loved badly before. So have I. She set one fingertip on the nearer ticket. And if people talk, they've got mouths. Let them earn the wear. Her laugh then was small and low and worth every empty year that had come before it, if only because it proved those years had not won entirely. The hearing in Cheyenne went as hearings do, slower than justice and faster than fear. Silas's holdings were put under review. 2 county clerks resigned before questions reached them properly. Pritchard testified in a voice so dry it nearly caught fire. Ada was exact. Elias was shorter than the lawyers liked and harder to shake. When it ended, they walked out into a bright wind that smelled of horses and coal and far places. They did, in fact, waste the afternoon on purpose. Bought sandwiches from a station girl with freckles. Sat on a bench where nobody knew their names. Watched trains come and go without either of them flinching much. On the ride home, Elias reached across the wagon seat only once, and Ada put her hand in his, as if setting down a weight she had carried longer than she meant to. By the first snow, folks in Red Wash had stopped calling her the South Fork woman and started calling her Mrs. Talbot in the tone reserved for people who are expected to stay. By spring, Miss Lottie was making pointed remarks about a decent house near the cottonwoods that needed both paint and another pair of boots by the door. Elias pretended not to understand. Ada pretended he was convincing. They married in June, quiet as a blessing. Church on a Wednesday. Doc Kittredge sweating in a collar he clearly despised. Widow Estes crying openly. Ben Avery standing up with Elias and looking so pleased with himself you'd think he had arranged the moon. Ada wore gray with a blue thread worked hidden at the cuff where no one saw but him. Months later, when the cottonwoods were full again and the worst of Silas Creel had become a matter for distant courts and local cautionary tales, red wash found its new shape had held. The bank ran cleaner. The widows kept their land. The church book carried Rose Halley's photograph, where morning sun touched it through the east window. And some evenings, if the late train was due and the weather good, Elias and Ada walked to the depot together, not because he was waiting on the dead, but because arrival had finally become something he trusted. One evening in the blue-gold hush after supper, he paused at the edge of the platform and looked down the road west where he had once spent half a life expecting the past to come riding back and explain itself. Ada slipped her hand into the crook of his arm and said, "A promise kept is still a road. It just leads somewhere new." Then the train whistle carried over the wheat fields, and beyond the depot lamps the porch light of the house by the cottonwoods burned steady against the deepening Wyoming dark. Next time I'll tell you about the ranch widow who hired a drifter to mend her fence and discovered he'd once signed the paper that broke her family's land. And if you know anything about second chances, you already know that fence was never the real thing being repaired. Until then, keep your lamp on.